You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
This is episode 292 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. This is the first episode of a two-part that's going to be a series with me and Will Porter, kind of looking at 2018, the year that was now. Going to go back through, look at some of the highlights from the year, the most important stories, and really focus around kind of how Donald Trump has reacted to, to the foreign policy situations, what he's prescribed and what he's done. So kind of evaluating Trump on his, best and worst policies. We're going to look at, what we very loosely classify as the good news stuff first. And then we end up kind of throwing on some of the things that are a little bit more ambiguous or have nothing to do with the U.S., just because the bad news episode is going to be very full. So I think that's a good way to kind of summarize how the year went. Will, do you generally agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And again, congratulations on another great year of shows. I gave you the same congratulations exactly 1 year ago. So, all
right, well,
good job on another year.
Yeah, thanks so much, Will. And I guess I should introduce you for those of you who haven't heard Will Porter on this show before. You must be very new to it. He is a journalist, freelance, antiwar.com, consortiumnews.com, libertarianinstitute.org are the best places to find his work. He's done a ton of articles on a sheep called The Daily Sheeple. He's on Twitter and on patreon.com. Will, tell people where they can find you on those platforms.
Yeah, sure. So if you want to support me on Patreon, I'm at patreon.com/WKP journalist, and my Twitter handle is WKP ANCAP, ANCAP.
All right. Well, make sure you do that. Go out and support Will. It's the holiday season still a little bit here, day after New Year's, and if you're still in the giving mood, got a couple extra bucks, think about donating to Will's show or to my show, patreon.com, Foreign Policy Focus here. I guess Will is, just donating to his work, not his show, because he doesn't have one yet. So today's show, good news kind of stuff. We're going to start off with North Korea news. Well, I guess reviewing North Korea from the past year, because that's what we're doing here. So I'm going to really kick it off to you, Will, and just kind of let you fill in where you won. I think the general narrative of the year is last year when we were doing the show, it didn't look good. We are talking about, the United States looking at carrying out a first strike against North Korea. We, had hawks like John Bolton advocating, saying that with the threats that North Korea has made, and their increasing nuclear long-range missile capabilities, they were a threat to the United States, and so we should just attack first. And then the Olympics happened, and really, I mean, that it, flip the coin the other way. Suddenly we're on the trap for peace. We have Koreans marching into, the Olympic Stadium under United Banner. That happened in 2018, right? And so, in the progression that has happened since, there seems to be a very driven attempt, mostly by North and South Korea and the leaders of those two states, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, to negotiate a way to end the Korean War, end the hostilities between the two countries, and start to, if not, make one country, a Korean country, but essentially reunify North Korea and South Korea and the Korean Peninsula economically and, allowing people to visit each other and go see the opposing countries. And so I know there's a ton of details I left out there, like the Singapore summit and everything else, Will, but I know you have a lot to say here too, so take it away.
Yeah. So as you're saying, compared to the status of U.S. and North Korean relations from around this time last year, there's been a huge improvement on this front. And I'm sure everyone remembers, the Rocket Man remark and the fire and fury, the tweets and all the hostilities that were flying around last year. And so the difference right now is kind of like night and day compared to then. And so, as you said, around the time of the Olympics, Trump started scaling back his, all this harsh rhetoric and actually started signaling a willingness to come to the table for talks, which Kim Jong-un basically reciprocated and accepted. So in June, after, a few tweets and statements suggesting that the administration was willing to talk, they actually had a meeting. I was kind of doubtful that this would actually happen, but they did it in Singapore, and it was the first, I think, official summit ever between the United States and North Korea, if I'm not mistaken. And from that meeting actually came a thing called the joint statement, in which the two parties kind of like made some broad agreements and commitments to, pursue peace and demilitarization and denuclearization. And some of that stuff has actually already begun. The North has already started removing landmines and armed guard posts along the DMZ. And they call it the demilitarized zone, but that's kind of like it's one of the most silly euphemisms in world affairs because it's one of the most militarized areas on planet Earth. It's certainly not demilitarized, but the North has actually begun to do that, to pull out landmines and guard posts and stuff. They've stopped their nuclear testing. They've dismantled some of their missile sites, and they've made a number of other commitments related to their nukes. And actually, in September, during their big Foundation Day parade, which is like their Independence Day celebration, basically. They didn't show off their ICBMs, their missiles, which they usually do in big events like that. And that really looked like a gesture, in respect for this peace process. And the U.S., for its part, actually canceled a couple of military exercises with the South, which is something the North has long complained about. And it's basically like a mock invasion of the North. And so you can see why they would be, they take offense to that. And so, yeah, there've been a couple, there's actually been some movement on this already. It's not just all empty talk. And, I think one thing to point out here with Trump is that he breaks with the long-standing U.S. position that North Korea has to, like, completely denuclearize before we can have any talks. Like, they demand complete surrender as a precondition for any negotiations. And without any kind of reciprocal, like, security guarantee or anything from the U.S., like, that obviously is never going to be accepted by the North. However, Trump actually seems to be a little more willing to work on this nuclear issue in a more piece by piece, step by step kind of manner, instead of demanding everything else, demanding everything up front. And so, I would urge caution when we're dealing with the U.S. empire always. But right now it does look like Trump is willing to put a lot of stuff on the table here. Officially ending the Korean War, resolving nuclear issues, reconsidering U.S. war games, and maybe even reconsidering the presence of the 30,000 American soldiers in the South. It's not clear exactly how much of this the U.S. would allow to change, but it's looking more promising right now than it has in probably decades. And I'll kick it over to you before I get into the North and South and their sort of the progress there.
Right. And I think one of the takeaways from 2018 should be, as far as what Trump did here, is he hasn't ruined anything. It would be very easy for, I think, Trump to do some hawkish things like continue to sail U.S. like different naval fleets near North Korea, flying nuclear capable bombers around North Korea, and turning his back and refusing to engage in talks, as you pointed out, are all ways that Trump really could have harmed the progress being made between North and South Korea here. And so the compliment that I continue to give Donald Trump is he's not getting in the way of these talks. That being said, I think it's worth noting that the United States hasn't really done anything to help the situation along. We're looking at situations like right now where there's like sanctions in place that prevent construction projects with North Korea. So that means if South Korea wants to build a road to North Korea or build rail lines to North Korea, that the sanctions that are in place by both the United States and the UN prevent that from happening. And basically with the U.S. a very important position on the Security Council, they're able to stop any sanctions relief or exemptions being given to North Korea so that these construction projects can take place. And, so this is a way where the United States, even though it does look like we're moving in a positive direction here and Trump isn't getting in the way too much, we're still getting in the way a little bit. And, at this point, South Korea is even starting to ask for some sanctions relief for North Korea. I think another very important takeaway is just with the Singapore summit that you have this discrepancy in interpretation, at least between what North Korea and the rest of the world kind of sees as the agreement and what the U.S. deep state does. And I don't even know if we put down Trump in this category. Talking about what I said on the last show regarding Syria, that, the policy put out by U.S. State Department officials and stuff like that isn't necessarily the same policy that Donald Trump actually has and what he says at the end of the day. And so he may go to North Korea at some point and just sign a peace agreement. I don't know. Seems like something that could happen, after we had these Syrian troops withdrawals and stuff like that. And so, if the State Department continues to say that we're not going to have, any, sanctions relief for North Korea until North Korea completely denuclearizes, then that may be the policy, but it also, that may not be how Trump sees things. And so we have the situation with the statement signed at the Singapore summit where North Korea says that, these things should happen in order, that we normalize relations and that we move closer to North Korea before we end up, actually having North Korea go through with the complete denuclearization. However, the United States says, oh, no, what you agreed to was to completely denuclearize and then maybe you'll get some sanctions relief. Or at least that's, the policy coming out of the deep state.
Yeah. In terms of specifically on the roads situation, this is actually pretty important. The joining of like roads and railways between the North and South. They've been trying to hammer this out, and they need to do what's called a survey to figure out, where they're going to put the road and how it's going to be built. And the fact that either side is even willing to do this says a lot. The North Koreans would have to give up a lot of their, secrecy of their military installations if they were to allow these teams to come in and survey. Now, I believe I could have misread this or be misremembering the report, but I believe it was reported that the UN actually gave a waiver to the Koreans to allow them to start doing this survey stuff.
So I think the waiver was like for the planning, but now we actually have the plans. And so now the sanctions are in the way of like actually executing the plans.
I see. So the U.S. is still not, they're still kind of intransigent there. I kind of interpreted the UN waiver as being sort of like, I get the U.S. probably could have screwed that up too if they wanted to. And so the fact that was allowed to go through seemed like kind of good news to me.
Yeah, we'll let them carry out surveys. Not actually build the roads, but you could survey for them. And that's the step forward of the Trump administration over the policies of, Bush and Obama. I know there are like a couple myths out there though, Will, that we've had in the past year claiming that all this progress that me and you are talking about really isn't there. What's happening is that me, you, Donald Trump, and the rest of us Americans that say, better to get along with North Korea than not, are being duped by Kim Jong-un, who's secretly still building all of his weapons, and he's still secretly, I guess, plotting an attack on the United States or South Korea. But at the same time, he's gained all this relief and good publicity. And this was the attack, when we started kind of these freeze for freeze agreements where North Korea agreed to stop testing and we pulled back on our military exercises. It's the case when we talked about, the Singapore summit. They said meeting with, Kim Jong-un is going to give them all this legitimacy. And then it's every week or two in the New York Times that we see this story.
Yeah, exactly. So like several, I guess I'd call them Trump opponents or deep staters or war party
Never
people.
Trump our people. Hashtag resist, Will.
Yeah, that's right. The hashtag resistance. It's been coming from these people and people in media and I think even in the intelligence community. It's pretty clear this is emanating from them. However, the typical pattern of this is that, these reports come out that say that the North is negotiating in bad faith and they're hiding things from the U.S. and kind of pulling the wool over Trump's eyes. And so specifically, for example, David Sanger of the New York Times, who has a pretty bad track record on misreporting Iran's nuclear program, I believe. He took a recent Center for Strategic and International Studies report, a CSIS report, which showed that North Korea had made improvements on several missile sites. And he took this thing and claimed that it proved that Trump was falling for some great deception. But this is pretty common for this type of article. Sanger was the deceptive one. He failed to point out that the majority of those improvements, which they proved this through like satellite imagery, and the majority of those photographs come from a time before the June summit, the Singapore summit between Trump and Kim. And so Sanger is claiming that Kim was moving ahead on his missile program after he had pledged to halt it, but that itself was a flat out lie. These photos were from prior to his commitment. And besides, I don't think North Korea actually promised to not produce conventional ballistic missiles. I think all the agreements they made pertaining to missiles and testing and stuff has to do with ICBMs, which could hold nukes. And so this is all kind of couched in a misrepresentation. And the South Korean government actually came out and criticized the Sanger report specifically and said that there's nothing new in that report to them. And a lot of international media had already reported on the existence of one particular site that Sanger alleged was being hidden from the Americans. And so clearly it was not being hidden. Clearly it was a pretty well-known site if world media had reported all over it. And there were other cases too. Over the summer of this year, there were a few other reports from the Washington Post and NBC, claiming secret missile work and secret work renovation on nuclear sites. But Gareth Porter, a journalist, actually has a great piece on this called "How the Media Wove a Narrative of North Korean Nuclear Deception," where he goes through a few of these accusations and shows how they were all either flimsy or poorly sourced or just based on outright misreporting of facts. And this all has clearly been an attempt to, enforce the war party's foreign policy agenda and to prevent all change, even if it, reduces hostilities in the world. And finally, I'll say, I think it's pretty interesting to see how the media outlets, in response to the talks, in response to the freeze for freeze agreements, how the mainstream media, the legacy media outlets all come out at the same time, sort of in lockstep. And they all have the same opinions and the same editorials and the same misreported facts. And so I don't know, maybe that's all a coincidence, but something tells me there's, a little more going on behind the scenes with the media efforts against this campaign, this peace campaign.
There's a couple more things I would just mention about 2018 looking back with North Korea. I think there's a couple very iconic moments that we're going to have, and hopefully if this Korean peace process continues to move forward, things that we'll look back on. The embrace between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in at the Truce Village, that happened in 2018. We had Moon Jae-in's trip to North Korea and the visit of a spiritually sacred mountain in North Korea. And then of course you had this event that was probably a little staged, but just general North and South Korean soldiers kind of coming together along the DMZ there and shaking hands. And so all these different events I think will kind of be remembered hopefully going forward as kind of the steps in the road towards peace. And I just, I don't think we could close out 2018 without giving Moon Jae-in enough praise for brilliantly facilitating this. It's really been the South Koreans who have came to the United States and said, no, the North Koreans are real serious about negotiating on their nukes. We have to do this. And, things that I really wasn't sure were possible as far as, taking these steps forward a year ago. I would say that was extremely optimistic to think that we would be where we are today in relation to North Korea.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, Trump is certainly not the sole driving force of all this. It's really the Koreans who are making this all happen. Without them, it wouldn't occur. But as you said earlier, the U.S. could screw it up if they wanted to, and they haven't yet. And it doesn't appear that Trump has any desire to do that. It seems like he's going through with this thing. But I guess just for the sake of completeness, I'll go over just briefly the broad strokes of the agreements between the North and the South. So in April, for the first time ever, I believe North Korean leader, or for the first time since the Korean War ended, North Korean leader entered South Korean territory. And so that was a huge landmark thing. And as a result of this meeting in April, they created something called the Panmunjom Declaration, which is basically, broad commitments to, reduce tensions in a number of key areas. And so they agreed to establish a peace treaty to replace the armistice agreement that's already in place. Your audience probably already knows this, but the Korean War between the North and South and between the U.S. and the North didn't ever officially end. There was no peace treaty to actually resolve it. But now the Koreans are they're working to change that and come up with an actual treaty. However, the Panmunjom Declaration also committed in principle to a number of other things, including, future meetings and talks, to connecting roads and railways, bringing separated families together, demilitarizing the DMZ, denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. And perhaps the biggest thing of this is they talk about outright reunification. And so these loftier goals are probably still pretty far away, but the fact that the people at the highest levels of Korean government leadership, the fact that they're even talking about these things, in a positive way publicly is massive. It's the most movement we've seen on the Korea issue in probably decades again. So this has been, you really can't overstate how good of news this is for 2018.
All right. So we should move on to Syria. And I will mention that me and Will did a recent episode on Syria, really breaking down Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. And so we're going to skip over a lot of that news on today's show. And so, while what's happened in Syria, I think was probably Donald Trump's best move in 2018, if we look at it, assuming that the troop withdrawal ends up happening as stated. But, we're getting some information coming out like it seems the Syrian Kurds are cutting deals with the Assad Russians that suggest the U.S. troop withdrawal is real. Probably his best foreign policy decision of 2018. But we already broke that down on a pretty recent show, so we're not going to do that again. But a lot of other news happened in Syria in the past year. If we looked in 2018, I think there was, me and Will talked about real concerns that, a potential conflict between the U.S. and Russia breaks out along the Euphrates River Valley here. We were still talking about what's going to happen with the liberation of the city of Deir ez-Zor and the Deir ez-Zor province of Syria. Who's going to reclaim what territory, and could that lead to possible conflicts? And of course, I believe it was in 2018 that we had the bombing of at least some Russian mercenaries by U.S. forces along the Euphrates River Valley. So very dangerous situations, especially at the first half of 2018. The U.S. continued the liberation of the territory of southeastern Syria from ISIS and took almost all of it back. By I would say like June or July, the summer months, and they just kind of held on to a few towns. And I believe one of those last towns was actually liberated today. And so Trump has now declared defeat over ISIS. There were big developments in the western area of Syria, especially in the territory south of Damascus. Of course, in April, you had the chemical weapons, the alleged chemical weapons attack, the chlorine attack. Me and Will covered that a lot on this show as well. And so I'll link to an episode on the show notes page, where if you want to learn about the Duma chemical weapons attack, you could do that. But it's worth pointing out here that you had all this territory, in southwestern Syria that leads up to the border with Israel and the occupied Golan Heights. And so there was a lot of tension, between Iran and Israel when it came here. And I know that's putting it pretty vaguely, and I'm sure there's some people who would say, well, no, there's really just tension between Israel and wanting to extend the war by bombing Assad-backed forces. But you had a lot of different airstrikes by Israel in Syria the past year, including some significant ones on Syrian Iranian forces, and including one Israeli attack that led to the shoot down of a Russian spy plane. And so, very dangerous situations going on between Israel, Iran, Russia, and Assad. However, that seems to have all been resolved now, and we have, I think, relative calm over the, kind of skies of Western Syria. Now we do have, like the, Christmas bombing, the occasional attacks by Israel in Syria, but that has certainly, reduced in tensions as the year went on. So, Will, I guess let's maybe start out here by your thoughts on the, kind of Assad campaign to retake those areas of Western Syria.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a lot of progress from Assad and Russia and the Iranians in taking back a lot of this territory in the West. And in Syria, sort of the country's kind of divided up. Like the West is really where all the important, like diplomatic and political cities are. It's where the capital is, where Damascus is. That's where a lot of the populated cities are. Now, there's like oil wealth and stuff out in the east, but the east is way less, it's sparsely populated. It's kind of like the desert. And so kicking these militants out of these heavily populated western areas, you mentioned Duma. Duma is like a suburb of Damascus. It's real close to the capital city there. And so, yeah, they sort of wrapped up a lot of their fights with rebels in these areas, and they made reconciliation deals, which typically involved an offer to rebels to either, stay here and reconcile with us and hand over your heavy weapons, or you can take your light arms and go to Idlib, where all the rebels are sort of being concentrated for, to deal with them, in one final, move. I don't know if it'll be, we thought it was going to be an invasion, but it might actually be, sorted out in a more diplomatic way. Other signs of progress we've seen, especially in this part of Syria, we saw border crossings opening up into the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, which is a pretty good sign. It's a sign of like normalization of movement of people and stuff. You have border crossings opening up back into Jordan, and that's a pretty symbolic thing. Syria was not too happy with the Jordanian government for its role in helping the U.S. arm rebels. However, now that border crossing's back open with them. And so, yeah, these are all really good developments, and now this is sort of capped off with the U.S. troop withdrawal, or at least the reports of that. We hope that, we're crossing our fingers that this is all it's, that they say it will be. And I guess maybe one final thing to touch on here is the security arrangements that the Kurds have made with Bashar al-Assad. I don't think we talked about this when we covered the initial withdrawal, because I don't think it had happened yet. This is very recent. So this sort of arrangement that the Kurds made with Assad might preclude a all-out Turkish assault and a slaughter of these Kurds. And so certainly that's good for sort of wrapping up this conflict. It was kind of worrisome. It seemed as if the Turks were about to invade and just mop up and wipe out the Kurds in the north. And that may, not happen now.
I guess too, we could talk about the standoff at Al-Tanaf. That was a pretty significant event in 2018. Here you have a border crossing, with Iraq and Syria. Correct. That's Iraqi territory on the other side of that border.
Yeah. Jordan, it's right by like 3 borders right there. Jordan's really close too, but yeah.
All right. Yeah. And so the U.S. occupied a base there, and they said, well, since there's U.S. and I believe French and British soldiers as well at that base and around 1,500 U.S.-backed Syrian rebels, no troops of any opposing force would come within 55 kilometers of it. And so there were several times where the Syrian army was chasing ISIS fighters across the Syrian desert and then were bombed by U.S. Forces because they said they got too close to U.S. troops in this area. And so it seems like this situation has finally been resolved with the announcement of the U.S. troops withdrawing from Syria, because the U.S. troops will be withdrawing from here as well. And, this has created a situation where these forces are now going to surrender. The kind of Syrian rebel forces there. And so, I'm guessing they'll get deals like they had in, Western Syria around Dara, where they'll give up their heavy weapons and just kind of rejoin society, there. But, just another result of a very tense situation, what could have been a very dangerous situation in 2018. All right. So moving on, Afghanistan. Here's a situation where I think I'm going to say I'm less confident that we're actually going to get the troop withdrawal. And it's less important because it's not a complete withdrawal, like in Syria. But we have Trump saying that he's ordered the Pentagon to plan for the withdrawal of 7,000 U.S. forces from Afghanistan. I've read reports that he's hoping to announce the actual withdrawal during his State of the Union speech. So that would be in early 2019, that we would, I guess, actually see this, troop withdrawal. As we talked on the last show, this has been advocated for by Rand Paul, and something that Trump seems, to be in a situation where he's now gonna end up doing this. So I know I've talked about it on the show already, Will, and I'll link to that episode in the show notes page. But I want to give you a chance to actually comment on what you thought about the withdrawal, how likely it is. Certainly, I think there's a lot of logistical questions that we're gonna have to get to in 2018 or 2019. Looking at the situation as we'll describe in Afghanistan, where the Taliban are making a lot of gains. If there's only 7,000 troops in Afghanistan, what can those troops actually do? Where can they actually be deployed safely?
Right. Yeah, I certainly agree with that. We're not really sure that this is, that this is good news yet. So there's not that much to say about it, but it looks pretty good so far. There's been a lot of reports that Trump's definitely considering a troop drawdown. But I've seen conflicting stuff about whether he's actually ordered it yet. I've seen some things say that he's ordered them to prepare for it. But then a few days ago, I read reports that with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford, saying that the drawdown is a rumor and that he's received no such orders. However, I think maybe it's possible that Trump is deliberately keeping some of these people in the dark. He might not want to be challenged on this, so maybe he's just going to suddenly spring it on them. That would be fine. If this does happen, though, as you said, they want to withdraw 7,000 soldiers, which is about half of the 14,000 that we claim are there. There could be more that are, in Afghanistan, more American troops, but 14,000, I think, is the rough official figure that they keep giving us. But yeah, I'm not really sure what, 7,000 soldiers could accomplish in Afghanistan that 14,000 couldn't, or that 100,000 during Obama's surge couldn't. Seems like they're just kind of becoming red, white, and blue targets. But, hopefully the drawdown happens, and hopefully it's a sign that our war in this country is kind of coming to a close.
Well, we've had some peace talks in Afghanistan in 2018. When they first started, I was pretty surprised, thinking that, the Taliban said they really won't negotiate on anything unless the Americans are completely 100% leaving. And it seemed unlikely to me that the Americans would ever leave Bagram. And I'm guessing they wouldn't really leave the rest of the country either. There's a couple other bases there, like in Helmand, that I can't imagine the Americans ever leaving. But peace talks have progressed a little bit. You have the U.S. envoy to Afghanistan saying that he believes a deal could be reached by April. Now, this was supposed to be the date of the presidential elections in Afghanistan, But that's been delayed again. So now we're not going to have that till late 2019 when it was supposed to be, in kind of the springtime there. So I guess, Will, what are your thoughts on the peace talks? Do you see any potential for success? I guess, are you kind of aligned with Khalilzad's optimism, or is it more just the fact that the Taliban look like they're winning?
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly want the peace talks to be successful. I want things to be resolved sort of more diplomatically instead of militarily. However, putting any kind of time frame on like when this might be successful, I think is very foolish. It's not, April seems a little soon for this to take place. Right now they're just trying to figure out some kind of ceasefire. The Taliban has agreed to talk with the Americans, but right now they're like totally intransigent about talking with the Afghan government. They've like refused to meet with the delegation that the Afghan government sent, earlier this month in December, in the meeting in Abu Dhabi. Now there's another meeting slated in the next couple days, I think, in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. But, and the Afghans are going to send another delegation, but it's not clear that the Taliban is going to talk to them or meet with them.
I think the Taliban said they just recently said they would not meet with them.
That's right. Yeah. And so it's going to be a repeat probably of Abu Dhabi. And sort of this seems to me like an absolute precondition to any kind of negotiated, long-term peace or diplomacy in Afghanistan. The Afghan government has to be part of that at some point. However, as a separate matter, ending the U.S. war there, you might be able to sort of do that, bilaterally, just between the U.S. and the Taliban or whatever, instead of bringing the Afghan government. Now, another sort of promising thing here is that officials from several other countries in the region have also in recent weeks and months met with the Taliban. And so you have Russian officials, Iranians, Pakistanis, Qataris, Emiratis. So a lot of parties are like working on this in one way or another. And so that's kind of promising too. But in terms of the success of this, I'm certainly hopeful, but I'm not like, I have high hopes, but low expectations in the immediate future. The withdrawal stuff and the drawdown stuff, if that does happen though, that might actually like free up some movement for this to happen. As you said, the Taliban have sort of been like pretty insistent that like they want the U.S. out of the country, completely. And so, that's a step toward that.
I think it's also, worth remembering 2018, talking about not saying this as a positive, but the progress that the Taliban have made in the country in their military campaign. They've secured a lot of districts, in several provinces, like Helmand, Kandahar. It seems they pretty much control the whole thing except the U.S. bases in the capital city. They've been able to attack and take, at least for a couple days, several provincial capitals, including Farah City and Ghazni. You wake up daily with reports from Afghanistan, 10 Afghan security forces are dead in attack, 20. They lost this checkpoint, they lose that district, they lose, this town, they lose that city. And so it's pretty much been a one-way flow. No matter, what the additional U.S. soldiers were supposed to do in 2018 in Afghanistan, they certainly didn't change the tides of the war. It's worth remembering that while the Afghan war has been off everybody's radar, I believe since the number was started being counted in 2009, 2018 had the most airstrikes of any year by the U.S. in Afghanistan. So we're even talking about through the Obama surge, we're carrying out more airstrikes now than we were before. A lot of these airstrikes are aimed at, kind of drug manufacturing targets. And, I'm not sure if this is due to any success, but it seems like the price of opium is down. So maybe there's actually a glut on the market than the opposite problem. But Will, I don't know what you had to say. And I know we wrote about this, in what would that have been, November or maybe even December of 2017, about what we thought would be kind of the Taliban's, military status in 2018.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was about to bring up. I was going to say, not to like toot our horn too much, but I think we kind of did call this. We accurately predicted that this year was going to be violent, that the Taliban was going to make a lot of gains. And we were sort of gauging that based on the, looking at like what was happening with the opium trade, with the poppy cultivation and like the record-breaking amount of poppies that were grown, last year. And so we were thinking the proceeds from that were going to really fund and spur on, Taliban, operations and attacks. And that seems to have been pretty much vindicated. Now, in terms of exactly how much the opium plays into this, I'm not 100% sure. I know I've read, since our piece came out, I've read conflicting things that kind of challenge the idea that opium is the main driver of the Taliban. But without doubt, like, certainly we can say that it helps them, that they certainly tax some of the trade. And we can also say that the vast majority, or at least in disproportionate levels, the cultivation and trade in poppies and opium was concentrated in places like Helmand, where the Taliban has an absolute foothold. And so this has sort of put them, I mean, they've been in this situation, this kind of position for a while, but the Taliban seems like they can pretty much project themselves wherever they want, and they can kind of just, like, you know, do whatever they like. They can take whatever city they want. They can't hold it permanently, but they kind of do this symbolic stuff where they'll come and take a provincial capital just to kind of say, hey, look, we can. And so this, to me, just makes it even more pressing that we have these talks and that we do this drawdown and that we start trying to phase out this war, the longest war in American history.
Well, I don't want to make any predictions on what's going to happen in Afghanistan in 2019, but I think me and you will probably be talking about, you know, what's happening in Afghanistan quite a bit in 2019 on this show, because it does seem like, especially with how much progress the Taliban made against the Afghan government this year, that the United States is going to need either a very different direction militarily, if that's the route we're going, if we're still going to try to win this war in Afghanistan, or to leave, because it doesn't. The current situation isn't sustainable, and more and more people are pointing out that the Afghan army is in shambles, and so I don't know what the plan here is, but it doesn't look good.
No, absolutely not.
All right, well, next I want to talk about the resignation of James Mattis, and specifically what you thought about this article by Peter Van Buren. I'll link to it in the show notes page. American conservative. I believe the day before Christmas, the December 24th. Like I said, it'll be in the show notes page. But in the article, I think Peter Van Buren kind of takes the line that the Mattis resignation is significant and starts to kind of change the tides of, the Pentagon momentum being towards more global war on terrorism.
Yeah. In terms of this piece by Peter Van Buren, who we've referenced pretty often, he's a pretty insightful analyst on these kind of things. I agree with all of his takes in that piece, except for maybe the headline of the article, which he may not have even have written himself. It's just a little bit too optimistic. It says something about how, Mattis's resignation marks the end of the global war on terror, something along those lines. And I think while Mattis's sort of protest resignation over the Syria withdrawal and among other things, it's certainly a milestone, but the war on terror is by no means over. So Peter's right, this is a good thing, but I think he sort of overemphasized that in the headline. Now, it was nice to see that Mattis actually quit specifically over policy differences with the president. He didn't sort of hold his tongue on this. He in his resignation letter, he actually mentioned specifically that, the president should hire somebody who's more in line with his own views, which certainly implies that Mattis is not in line with his views. And so those types of views, I hope he means like the Syria withdrawal and the potential Afghan drawdown and the, things like peace in Korea. I hope Mattis is saying like, hire somebody who's more in line with that. And I definitely want Trump to take that advice. I almost want Trump to feel like offended that Mattis disagrees with him and like emboldened to hire somebody who's completely different. Like a lot of people see, James Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis. It's funny that with that nickname that they see him as a stabilizing influence on Trump.
The adult in the room.
Exactly.
That's
exactly
the phrase. The adult in the room is the worst phrase of 2018.
It's one of those like, Iran-backed Houthis. It's like one of those just like throwaway lines that should be trademarked. It's just like reliably repeated all the time. But yeah, the adult in the room. But no, Mattis buys into a lot of this garbage, like, DC mythology that passes as foreign policy wisdom. Like the safe haven myth and things like that. And Mattis, I think, sells those ideas in a very sort of appealing package. He's the mad dog, he's badass, and he kicks ass. But also he's very cultured and sensitive and, very articulate and intelligent. And so that's why he got this reputation of being the adult in the room. However, no, I think he buys into a lot of stuff that, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the foreign policy ideology that's gotten us into so much trouble over the last few decades. Now, so while Mattis was pretty good on the Korea issue, that may be the one downside of him leaving is that he was pretty good on that. This, I think, creates an opportunity to kind of shake things up and to start turning the ship in a different direction. So it's overall a great thing. Right.
I think Peter's best analysis is that Mattis is a global war on terror warrior. That's kind of his battle. So, this is kind of post-Cold Warrior. Now we have, the global terror war, like that, this is Mattis's career, just like so many of, these generals coming up. You'll see that they, maybe as officers, but they did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the Middle East. And so, they've lived these wars, they've fought these wars. I think a lot of these guys, do have like some, personal experience as officers, but at least, kind of being in and around combat in these areas. And so, that's kind of Mattis's identity. That's the way he sees the war. That's the mission he's dedicated himself to. And so, him leaving is a good thing, for all those reasons. Now, I think it's premature right now to predict that this is like the end of the global war on terror era. For all we know, Trump's pick for next Secretary of Defense is Tom Cotton, who, in line with Secretary Mattis, is a veteran of these wars and is a global war on terror warrior. And, he would double down on all the policies. He would demand that Trump stay in Syria. He would demand that, we add more troops to Afghanistan. Mr. President, the solution isn't to tape 7,000 out. It's to add 70,000, would I guess be his recommendation. Or, we do have somebody become, Secretary of Defense who is kind of post global war on terror. I mean, like Colonel Wilkerson's probably an option. Somebody like a Rand Paul, who definitely has the presidency on foreign policy right now, is somebody who is not a terror war guy. And so I don't think that it's impossible that, this is the turning moment. I'm just not quite as optimistic about Peter that we're there.
Yeah, in a certain sense, like, I guess I kind of understand what Peter's saying, that Mattis is sort of the quintessential terror warrior. He served under administrations under both major parties and many of these wars. And, he buys into a lot of the mythology. He had something to do with writing the coin doctrine in Afghanistan, or in, I think, both Iraq and Afghanistan, but definitely Afghanistan. He's the quintessential Cold Warrior. So his resignation is definitely like symbolic. It's a symbolic blow against the terror war, but not a substantial one necessarily.
We also had the recognition of the screeching Valkyrie at the UN, Nikki Haley. I cannot say anything that made me happier than the day she said that she was standing down. That is one of my highlights of 2018. I really can't stand that woman. Everything that she says is just, it's so against the truth and so obviously so. Talking about how it's the fault of the Palestinians when some little child in Gaza gets shot in the face by an Israeli sniper, or a medic with her hands in there gets shot. Oh, it's because the Gazans are all terrorists, of course. And that the Iranians are all evil nuclear weapon scientists who are all secretly, making a nuke in their basement or something stupid like this. The Houthis are backed by Iran. Everything she said was wrong, and she's stepping down, Will. So I know that you've done quite a bit of talking and looking into the terrible things that Nikki Haley has said. So I'll go ahead and let you have some fun here at the end of 2018 and the end of Nikki Haley's reign of terror at the UN.
Yeah, I mean, she really can't get out of there quick enough. It's a great thing to see her go. I haven't actually heard that much from her lately. She seems like she's quieted down a little bit since she announced her resignation. However, she's been like the worst war hawk in Trump's cabinet. In a very sort of visible position diplomatically as the UN ambassador. So everything from Syria to Russia to Iran, Yemen, Venezuela, Ukraine, Palestine, and beyond, all of these places, Haley has worked hard to spread conflict and to, advocate U.S. military intervention just everywhere. So she was particularly bad during the several alleged Syrian regime chemical attacks. Each time she was screeching at the top of her lungs, like well before any kind of investigation could be done, that she knew with certainty who did this. And that even at one point saying that in the future, if this happens, we're going to immediately blame Russia and Iran too. And, sort of just setting up that crazy tripwire, or, basically telling Syrian rebels, go ahead and, stage another gas attack. So she's been horrible on Syria. But maybe even worse on Iran. She's been one of the loudest officials pushing the whole Iran and Yemen line, this narrative that, that both parties pretty much push, which is effectively doing PR for the Saudi, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That's their line. They have the biggest interest in pushing the idea that Iran is in Yemen and backing the Houthis. But at one point, Haley held this meeting and presented these missile fragments as proof that Iran was supplying the Houthis missiles. But the UN panel that was tasked with looking into this missile, these fragments, concluded that it had no evidence as to who supplied this or the broker of this missile. And another former UN weapons inspector named Scott Ritter also pointed out that, like, based on his expertise, the fragments look a lot like they came from a Scud missile, which wouldn't have come from Iran. It's more likely to, at some point in the past, have come from Iraq and then been modified by the Houthis, who have sort of taken over Yemen's official government and have access to a lot of, Yemeni army and military arsenals. And it's kind of funny, like, for Haley to be such a radical so-called humanitarian interventionist. It's really not funny. It's just interesting to note the countries that she decides to attack and the ones that she doesn't decide to attack. You know, Saudi's insane, indiscriminate slaughter in Yemen for the last over 3 years is probably the most pressing, like, moral issue of this era, of this decade. But you won't find Haley anywhere near that. Her vitriol is only reserved for, approved official U.S. state enemies. And so, good riddance to this lady.
All right. Well, so the last good news topic, and this is really stretching it to get some good news, but here's how I'm going to look at this. From the perspective of Donald Trump, he continues to resist the idea that he colluded with the Russians to influence the 2016 election. And so somehow Russiagate, which started in the summer of 2016, we're now at the end of 2018, Will, and have recorded numerous shows on the issue, have debunked every single narrative, and yet this narrative lives on. And so I do want to take the time to talk about some of the kind of highlight moments of Russiagate in the conspiracy theories in 2018. I think, there's the actual, like, kind of plea agreements in the indictments, or not the indictments, the sentencing. Some of these, kind of Trump officials or Trump election officials, Papadopoulos, Manafort. I don't know if he's in jail yet, but he's certainly in trouble, will be going to jail. Michael Cohen, and then Michael Flynn. I think I got all those guys. Have been in trouble. Now, it's important to note, the important thing here is that nothing any of these guys are going to jail for has anything to do with Donald Trump colluding with the Russians to influence the 2016 election. Nothing in here has anything to do with election meddling at all. These are all kind of separate charges and influences. I think the closest one to being something related to the 2016 election is some of the stuff dealing with Michael Cohen, just because I think some of the hush money payments paid to some of these women that Trump had affairs with occurred during the campaign. So I think there's some questionable campaign finance law stuff, but that doesn't have anything to do with Russia, the WikiLeaks emails, or any other part of the Russiagate conspiracy theory. So, Will, I guess I'm just going to let you set yourself up because there's so much to pick from here and we can't get to all of it on today's show. But why don't you go ahead and take like one or two of these kind of new myths in 2018 and just destroy it for me?
Sure. Yeah, I've often said that I think Russiagate looks to me like it's like 5 different separate conspiracy theories all just like pasted together in the same narrative. And they just pretend like all these things are totally consistent with each other and like reinforcing to each other. But like you're saying with like this Michael Cohen thing, like that had nothing whatsoever, even conceivably, to do with Russia. I was listening to our previous year in review show from last year. And it's funny, like last year, this was a big story, and it still hasn't gone away. Like we're still talking about this, years later, 2 years after the 2016 election. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how much like unambiguously good news there's been on this Russiagate thing, but certainly the fact that Trump hasn't gotten us into a nuclear exchange with Russia is good, I guess, if that's your, the lowest possible standard. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly glad about that. And Trump doesn't appear to be like really buying into or like being browbeaten into accepting a lot of this narrative, as he appeared to be, earlier in the year. And so it seems like he's kind of like stood, solid on this stuff. Now, yeah, just to go over something recent that came out, there've been dozens and dozens of like different allegations and debunkings of those allegations, and some of them have been retracted or edited later. There's been so much of this. But just to go over some of the recent stuff, there's a great reporter named Aaron Mate who writes for The Nation, and he's at The Real News, who's been like one of the best journalists on, being critical of Russiagate. And he recently published a piece at The Nation on these 2 recent Senate Commission reports on the Russian social media trolls. And sort of that's like one plank of this whole conspiracy. There's like the hacking allegations, there's the claims of collusion, and then there's like the claims of the Russian trolls on social media who sowing discord and doing all kinds of stuff like that. And so Aaron Mattis here is covering these two Senate commissioned reports on the troll aspect, which of course have been used to, like, you know, they've been blown up and presented as damning proof that, you know, Russia is behind this. And so just a couple of things to point out of these reports, like their findings are pretty lackluster. Like, for example, only 11% of the IRA, or the Internet Research Agency's posts across all social media had anything to do with the election. And I know we've gone over the indictments of the Internet Research Agency and the people affiliated with that. So we don't have to get too deeply involved there, or too deeply in detail there. But, you know, only 6% of their tweets and 7% of their Facebook posts even mention Trump or Clinton by name. And so clearly this thing has been massively blown out of proportion, this Internet Research Agency thing. Previously, in other reports, a Facebook official came out and said that 25% of the suspected Russian ads weren't seen by anybody. They just kind of got lost in the system and weren't actually seen. And over half of the ones that were seen were published after the 2016 election. So clearly they couldn't have had much to do with the outcome of that. And the amount of money that the Internet Research Agency spent was like around $100,000, or 0.05% of the combined $81 million that Clinton and Trump both spent on the Facebook ads. So just sort of in summary, the findings of these reports, here's a quote from Mattis. He says, quote, "Based on all of this data, we can draw this picture of Russian social media activity. It was mostly unrelated to the 2016 election, microscopic in reach, engagement, and spending, and juvenile or absurd in its content." So yeah, I mean, I think we've mostly covered, like, you know, all the major planks and all the major claims of the Russiagate thing, but here's just like the most recent debunking of the, you know, the ridiculous social media thing, the sow discord claims.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good place to move on. On the next show, we'll probably pick up with the Russia topic, just because, while Trump has been good on Russiagate, he has not been good on Russia. And so that's when we'll get into all that there. Thanks everybody so much for turning into this first episode of our 2018 review series. We covered what we thought that Trump did okay on. So North Korea, Syria, Afghanistan, Mattis leaving, Haley leaving, and this Russiagate stuff are very loosely gathered good news subjects of 2018. I don't know how we're going to pack in all the bad news stuff into, one episode, but we'll see what we could do coming up on the next show here. I would expect the next episode to be out in the next week. Will, do you have anything else to add here? Any other like good news hallmarks or anything else you want to say before we end here?
Yeah, no, I mean, of course a lot happened this year, but, I think we pretty much covered most of the good news this year.
Yeah, so I wish it could have been a longer show, everyone, but, I do appreciate you all tuning in, and, there's going to be a ton of links in the show notes page to like past episodes, from when Will was on the show, and different articles, great stuff to, kind of look at and go over if you want. We gave a little bit more broad strokes in this episode than we usually do. We usually like really hammer down the details and debunk all the lies. But we hit the main ones on today's show because, 2018 was a pretty busy year. So Will, thanks so much for coming on. Twitter, WKP and Cap, patreon.com, WKP journalist for this show. Check out libertarianinstitute.org. My daily news roundups there. My podcast is on that page, immersionnews.com, and then patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus.